What's up guys, it's Unders here, and today we're going to have a look at a really simple question. What is an EQ, or what are equalizers for in music? Now, an equalizer, an EQ, is a really common plugin. You'll see it as well in many different forms. If you're looking at plugins, there are potentially thousands of emulations of different analog bits of kit. If you've ever used any kind of live desk or studio desk, you'll see all the channels lined up with all the little knobs and details on them. Every channel's generally got an EQ on it, and every DAW, like we've got Logic behind me, has an EQ like so. So what's it for? Well, an EQ allows you to change amplitude at a frequency specific area. Great, what does that mean? So let's have a quick thought process. You record a vocal, for example, like I am here. Now, when you record that vocal, there's some energy lost as it transfers through the air, as it causes the diaphragm to vibrate on that microphone. That's why we use different types of microphones, condensers and dynamic. A dynamic microphone, for example, will lose some high end. Now, an EQ, something called Corrective EQ, would allow us to adjust that high end and bring it back so it sounds natural and sounds how it should before it's gone through that recording process. The other thing we can do is use EQ to shape and create sound to suit certain things. So a artificially created sound, we can EQ that to create a new sound, or so that two sounds can work together cohesively. To make this all make a little bit more sense, we're going to have a look at this loop I've created here, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing, why, and hopefully you'll leave with a better understanding of EQ. If this video is helpful for you guys, please do bash this subscribe on the channel, always super helpful for me. And as well, there's like 70, 80, maybe 100 at this point, more Logic tutorials. They are linked down below, and I hope you can watch some of those, find something useful, and throw a comment down below. I do my best to reply with any questions you guys have got. Let's get into it. Boom. Alright, so here we are in Logic, and we're just having a look at what an EQ is and what EQ can do for us. So I've thrown together this little loop here. I've made like a little reslide, just a kick, snare, a reverse hi-hat, and then using the drummer, it's just this. Cool. Not particularly balanced or anything, but we're going to look at that as we go along. So, like I explained in the introduction there, an EQ allows us to adjust amplitude across a specific frequency area. And for example, my voice as you're hearing it now, I EQ these vocals. So I actually take out the low end because just the environment I'm recording in, I get sort of a boomy bit on the voice that is just generally unpleasant for people who are having to listen to it over and over. And there's a tiny little boost around 2K, which just helps everything stick out a little bit more. And the mic I'm using captures all the high end really nicely, so I don't have to adjust that at all really. But you could use that to correct inertia. So if we open the channel EQ, for example, on this lead sound, just so I can show you guys what we're on about. If we had, say, recorded a bit of a vocal sound, and we had lost some of the energy in the high end due to inertia, we can adjust the amplitude of that by just giving, say, a little boost up here, which would correct that. Now, that's the reason that you get noise profiles like up on the screen now for certain microphones. It's to let you know how their sort of frequency balance is. And hopefully, if I found it, this is the balance for the microphone that I'm using right now. So you can get an idea for the frequency response it would have. And you could sort of reverse engineer that and EQ it to make it a perfectly flat signal. The other thing we can do is balance the volume of a particular sound at a particular area to free up space for others. So as you see, I've got the EQ up on this lead at the moment, and if we turn the analyzer on, which is just at the bottom section here, this is going to show us the audio spectrum post EQ. You see how it says analyzer post? We can make it so it's pre as well, and that would be before it's been EQ'd. We're just going to have the lead, and it's going to show us all the frequency areas at the minute because the EQ is not doing anything. Now let's, for example, say we didn't really need this really bassy section here between 20 and 50 Hertz. We can adjust the amplitude of that by removing it using what's called a high pass. Now to activate the high pass, we've got this lovely little icon just up here. We can click it and we see now there's a very gentle roll off. It says here starting at 20 Hertz, but look, it rolls back to maybe sort of the 30 Hertz region. Yeah, you know, around the 30 Hertz region. And that's because of the slope it's using, which is this number here. So it decreases by 24 decibels of amplitude per octave. And it does that based on the Q, sometimes referred to as the quality, almost always the Q. And this is the steepness of the slope effectively. So we could adjust it, you see, and it's gonna give us different types of slope, and we can put it really quite low here, and you see it drags right the way off, maybe into sort of 150 really gently. And if we go a bit harsher with it, it actually gives us a boost right before it starts cutting off. But what's important to note is we can remove some of that low end. So if I was to bring it back here to 50, and we're just using sort of fixed placements in Hertz just so we can get a real reference of what we're doing. So you can now see that slope is taking off by 24 dB over the octave, but it also rolls off some of our frequency above its cutoff point as well, right? We can bring it up here and then it would end up boosting it. We can then adjust that using the Q, and it's going to bring it down. That's just the nature of it. We can't just cut things straight away, but we can increase this, so we can double it. So now it's dropping by 48 decibel per octave. Now 20 to 50 Hertz, that's going to roughly cover our lowest register octave, and you see that it goes all the way off. You know, it's just dropping out. So we can now see when we play it, that low end should be gone. What I'll do here is I'll swap the analyzer from pre and post, and maybe you can see it a little bit more here. But if you're struggling to really get what's going on, if you look around the 45 to 50 region just here, when it's on pre, we can see we've got audio right up around this region. When it goes to post, it's actually dropping off entirely, and it's sort of down here. There's nothing happening in those lower regions. Just have one more look. So we've controlled that amplitude in the low end, and we've completely taken it away in this instance. Now the other thing we can do is rebalance that. So this lead sound I've made here has a really big fundamental, I think around the 100 Hertz region. At 95 Hertz. Now I think our kick drum also sits right around that area. So what I'll do is I'll just select the kick drum, and we'll just put a channel EQ on there as well. And we can just have a little look and see where the fundamental for the kick drum is. So there's definitely going to be a conflict there. We can see they're sort of right on top of each other, right? So what could we do to help those things work a little bit better together? Well, there's a lot of high end in the lead, and maybe we don't need that 100 Hertz frequency quite so much. So we could take that away to a degree, or just balance it out using the EQ. Now we can go with a higher Q here. Now a higher Q will give us a narrower band, and we can look to just dip that away a little bit, and it'll maybe help us balance a bit better with our kick drum. Now we could be even more extreme here, and we could decide that perhaps we actually don't need any of this right the way up to that 100 Hertz marker. We could just take it all away and let the kick drum have all of that space. And that actually works quite well. The kick drum has a lot more freedom and space now. Hope you can hear that. So we'll just disable it and then I'll bring it back in and we should hear the kick drum becomes a lot more prominent, but nothing's changed in level of the overall balance. We've just taken away some specific amplitude at specific frequencies on one part of a sound. What's definitely evident though is we lose some of that energy that the lead brings through. So we need to find a happy medium that we find pleasing to our ears that works with everything. So we can maybe just bring it back a bit and just have it so it's just dialed away a bit. Now another thing we could look to do and balance them out, there's not a huge amount of energy in the lead around 2K region. You can see that in the frequency here. So it's got lots around 3K, it's got lots around 1K, but there's a little bit of space at 2K. Maybe we could take the kick drums 2K area and we could give that a little bit more amplitude. And maybe that would help it stand out even more. And then perhaps this kick drum, we don't need some of the mids, for example. Let's have a listen to them and see if there's something in there that's maybe unpleasant. Oh, see, there's definitely some boxiness here we just don't need in that kick drum. We could take that away and that gives more space to our lead again. But our kick drum still sounds good and it actually still sounds just as full as it did before. But now we've got a little bit more space between the two. Knowing there's not a huge amount of energy in the 2K region, maybe we could even counter it and we could dip it a little bit out here as well and exacerbate that whole situation. So should we have a listen to what we've done? If I turn both of the EQs off and we'll see what the relation is now like between them. We'll make them a little bit smaller so I can get them both on the screen at the same time for you. So they're both off and then I'll try and reintroduce both of them. Let's see if we can reintroduce them both together. Brilliant. So each individual sound hasn't changed that much. In fact, we've maybe improved it to our ears by changing the level. So we're making it louder and quieter, but only in specific areas so we can get everything working together. Now, this becomes a more and more complex thing. So now when we, for example, bring the snare in, we might find that's completely lost and we need to adjust some other areas. Brilliant, so there's loads of high end getting through in the snare, but it's just not coming through on its fundamental. So let's have a look at the EQ on the snare as well. And we're now going to have 3 EQs on the screen all at once. So look, our fundamental on our snare is right around 200, and our lead, again, it's got something going on right around 200. And we can see we've got lots of the high end coming through on the snare. There's lots of low end here that we don't really need. We can just take that away. We know that the fundamental here is where we really need to start it. So we can use a slightly harsher cutoff and not adjust that and get rid of what we don't need. Now we could boost this fundamental and make it louder, but it's already pretty loud. So perhaps we would adjust something in here to give it a bit more room to break through. Let's see what we can do. It's also possible that there's so much high end coming through in the snare that we're just not hearing the fundamental. It's being overshadowed. So again, we can adjust the amplitude of the high end here, and we can do that using our high shelf. And we could just take the high frequency down by around 3 dB here and listen back to that. See? So now we've done that. Notice there's less high end, so we actually hear more of the mids, and the fundamental of the snare is starting to creep in now. So here I would use something called an EQ sweep, which is where we're going to make a bit of a boost, and we'll give it a relatively high EQ, but not too high, and we're just going to move it around, and we're going to listen for the area that's most prominent and harsh in the snare, and we're going to dial that back even further. It's going to be somewhere around probably around 3 to 7K, somewhere in that area. Brilliant. So by dialing that back, a really sort of harsh, over pushed area, we've just reduced that back in amplitude, but we now get a lot more of that snare fundamental through. So again, I will highlight all 3 channels. We'll have all 3 EQs off, and then we want to hear how all 3 work together. Now I've definitely dialed back too much on the snare, so we'll just take that back to around 1.5 dB, but we'd still get rid of this really harsh area that wasn't too pleasant to listen to. But hopefully you can hear that those changes in amplitude and using those different tools we have with like the high shelf and the high pass, for which we've got the opposites as well, can just let us balance things together and correct things that maybe don't work together. And using this tool on each sound that requires it, it can be great just to get everything working together. That combined with leveling out and balancing everything should be the main 2 tools that you use to get the overall balance of a track together. So if I was just to now level these out, so we just flatten them, and we'll get all 3, and we'll get all of the elements going together, and hopefully we can hear that we've achieved something. And if we take our 3 EQs, we'll turn them off. The snare becomes very harsh and top-endy with no body. We get a lot more focus just with those EQ changes and nothing else occurring there. Dial back our hats. Give focus to everything else. And that, guys, is essentially it. That's really what EQ does. It allows us for an adjustment of amplitude at a specific frequency using Q and basically an adjustment of level in decibels. It's very similar to adjusting your faders, but you're choosing a specific area of a sound to adjust that fader in. Hope that was helpful. I hope you understood something. I hope that you got a little bit of use out of it. If you did, thank you very much. Subscribe to the channel and I will see you on some of the other tutorials.